We're now on the section C debrief video. There's 40 marks across the two questions, so on a 1.8 minute per mark, that's about 72 minutes. We'd allow for the whole of section C, so 36 minutes for each question. Now don't feel obliged that you have to do the questions in order A, B, C, D, E. I always think it's worth reading the questions that you're given, the requirements, and seeing if there's any easier marks to get. Here we've got an ROI calculation for each division, and then we need to state whether or not each manager reached their target. Don't forget that second bit. Calculate the residual income for each division and briefly comment on their performance. For C, discuss the performance of the two divisions for the year, including the main reasons why their ROI results differ from each other, and explain the impact the difference in ROI could have on behaviour of the manager of the worst performing division. So as a discussion, we need to include these main reasons and explaining this difference. That's for 6 marks. And advantages and disadvantages of RI for 4 marks. So I'd expect 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages in order to get all of the marks. This question, you could probably just go ahead and answer without even reading this. Although saying that, if you can apply, if you can use some examples from this question in here, that generally is better than maybe a mark floating around for that application. I'm going to go in order just because I think it's easier for you to follow if I've done it in order. So go ahead and pause the video, read through the requirement, and then when you unpause it, I'll scroll down. So for part A, we need the ROI, and we need it for division C and division D. And it tells us here the ROI calculation uses controllable profit and then average divisional net assets. So I'm going to do a working for each of those. So controllable profit, we've got the net profit here, and then we've got some notes which will likely lead to some modifications of the net profit to give us our controllable profit. So I'll start by taking the controllable profit from the profit and loss account here. And it now talks about these fixed costs in note 1, and that includes depreciation of 520 for C and 180 for D, and 40% of those costs in each division relates to assets controlled but not owned by head office. So now we're going to add back depreciation. Depreciation for division C is 520,000. 60% is controlled by the division and 40% isn't, so multiplied by 40%. And similarly for division D, we have 180,000, once again multiplied by the 0.4. Point number 2, or note number 2, head office recharges all of its costs to the two divisions. These have been included in the fixed costs as 750 for C and 590 for D. Once again, those are not controllable, so we'll add back head office costs, and they are just exactly as we're given there. And notes 3 and 4 are not related to controllable profit. So now we've got our controllable profit. Next we need to find the average divisional net assets. We've got opening and closing amounts here, and the average is simply adding them together and divided by 2. One thing I should say about the timing, although this is 6 and 4, some of the parts I'll work out for A will be used in B. So I'm actually seeing this as a 10 mark question, so I'm allowing myself 18 minutes to do both A and B together. You might have looked at note 3 and wondered, should you be doing an adjustment to the divisional net assets? They're obviously using a different approach in terms of their depreciation, one using straight line, one using reduce and balance, but we haven't got enough information to make them a like for like comparison. So we can't do an adjustment here, but the reason this is here is so we can make a comment on it later. So for the ROI, it's simply the controllable profit divided by net assets and done as a percentage. So we've calculated the ROI for each, and did each manager reach the target? So that's all of part A done. I like to highlight the answer because I think it helps the marker see exactly where the answer is. If I had one of these incorrect, then they'd be able to backtrack through the spreadsheet to find out where I went wrong. So part B, we're finding the residual income. The controllable profit we've already worked out above. The net assets we've also worked out above. So the imputed interest is at 12%. We know that because we're told the cost of capital is 12%. So 0.12 times the assets, copy and paste, and then the RI equals the controllable profit minus the imputed interest. That follows through with what I said earlier. The speed of getting the answer for RI and the 4 marks, we benefited from some of the calculations above. So that's almost there. We need to briefly comment on performance. I don't like this. I don't like that they've got a spreadsheet where they want us to comment. I think it should be in a word processor. Something like this, a no or a yes, that's fine. But a comment, I think, in the actual exam would probably be separated out. For my comment, I've stated the fact RI is positive for both divisions, and what that means, that indicates they're creating income in excess of the cost of capital, which is desirable. What's the implication? This means both managers may receive a bonus if RI was used as a performance measure. And you'll remember from your read through of the question, they currently use ROI and they are considering RI to discourage dysfunctional behaviour. So on to C, this is for 6 marks. We need to discuss the performance of the 2 divisions for the year, including the main reasons why ROI results differ from each other, explain the impact the difference could have on behaviour of the manager of the worst performing division. Now when you do this, you'll get a model answer. So I'm not going to just write out a new model answer, and instead I think it's more useful if I suggest how I would approach this. What a lot of students do is they read the question and then they just try to answer it without any real strategy behind that. And my suggestion is to flip it around. Look at the mark allocation. We've got 6 marks. So what I want to do is give the examiner 6 reasons to give me a mark. And the way I like to do that is to use headings, which are in essence a mini essay plan. Now, I'm not a fan of big, long, extensive essay plans that aren't enough marks available and therefore time available to do that. And that's why I just do this, something like 1 or 2 points which will ultimately become my heading. And I lay them out like this. And there's a few benefits of doing this. Firstly, I can then quickly link back to the question to check I've covered all of the things I've been asked. And that's a big error a lot of students make. They answer part of the question and not other parts. So we need to discuss the performance of the 2 divisions for the year. So my approach would be to discuss the performance of Division C, to separately discuss the performance of Division D. And you see how I'm now turning my essay plan into headings, and then I would look at them together, compare the 2 of them. So if I talk about the performance of Division C and I give enough value, then I've got a mark. Division D, another mark. If I can do some sort of comparison between the 2, then I've got another mark. And it tells us why the ROI results differ from each other, and then explain the impact on the manager of the worst performing division. So the worst performing division, we need to go back to here, was Division C. And then some sort of conclusion. Whenever a question has 5 or more marks, there's almost always a mark for a conclusion. When I say a question, I mean a narrative question, not a calculation. I've only got 5 points there and there's 6 available, but I think that's good enough to start with. So now I would start to build up my narrative under each of these points. And like I say, I won't do them all, but I might just do this comparison one because I think that's one we touched on earlier with this note 3. So for example, in the Division C and D comparison, I've put it may be unfair to compare the ROIs of the 2 divisions. Full stop. That's the point I want to make. That won't get me a mark, and I can't leave it there. I now need to explain that statement. But I like this approach where I say something, the point I want to make, which is generally sort of a short, succinct, and then I explain that point. I call it the 2-sentence approach, and I would expect that pair of sentences to score a mark. I've said the thing, but it won't score enough. Now I need to tell the marker why I believe that's the case. And Division D and C have different approaches to depreciation, which will be reflected in their controllable profit and their average net assets, and so affect the ROI calculation. So that's probably enough for the mark. You could expand it a little bit more if you wanted to say, maybe expand on why that's unfair, or maybe a solution is they could do an adjustment to account for this. So you could suggest an improvement. So performance of Division C would be talking about it hasn't met the target, whereas when we're talking about Division D, we say it has. When we compare them, I've mentioned this, but I'm still hunting for my 6th mark, but I think there's another point we can talk about in the comparison. But the other thing I'd be talking about is I would be mentioning that Division C has invested more recently in assets. Newer assets will drag down the ROI compared to older assets that have had more depreciation. So here I've put in Division C has more recent investments in assets. New assets have not been depreciated as much as old assets and so can decrease the ROI. This is one of the issues with ROI. It can discourage managers from investing in assets, benefiting the short term at the cost of the long term benefit. And this could also be the cause of Division C not meeting the 15% target. So now I feel I'm on my way to getting the 6 marks if I make a comment on Division C, a comment on Division D, got 2 comments on the comparison. The impact on the manager of Division C would be a demotivation and what impact that could have, and then some sort of conclusion, and then I've probably picked up all 6 marks that are available. Like I say, I won't do the whole thing. What I want to just highlight is my approach here is to use the 6 marks and the question to drive a mini essay plan, which I turn into headings, and then I make sure I populate each of those headings. What that does is it means I'm making sure I'm picking up all parts of the question that were asked without having to reread it each time. I can see I haven't written anything for these, so it helps me as I'm answering my question to target those areas. And if I run out of time, it doesn't matter. Let's say I've done the top 2, this one and the conclusion, and I haven't had time to do this. That's okay. I would just leave it there because the examiner will see that you intended to do it and will probably work out that you've run out of time. If then later on in one of the other parts of the whole exam, I've got a bit of spare time, I can come back to this and I can populate that without having to try and work out where I was. I've left myself a placeholder so I can then come back and hopefully collect that final mark should I be a bit faster at one of the other parts of the exam. And then finally explain the advantages and disadvantages of using RI to measure divisional performance. 4 marks, I would expect 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages. Again, I'm a big fan of headings. Advantages of RI, disadvantages of RI. They don't have to be difficult. These aren't full answers, but this is the sort of things I would probably be looking to talk about. The advantages is it encourages the making of decisions which are in the best interest of the company, and I explain how. If the RI is positive, then the manager will invest in that project, and we can use RI to recognize different risk levels by using a different cost of capital percentage, and that can help with better decision making. The disadvantages, it's an absolute measure, it's an actual number, so we can't compare divisions of different sizes, e.g., and I would probably, although we don't have to use a link to this, I would probably reference the net asset base of the 2 divisions here and the difference in size there. And another disadvantage is it's based on a measurement of profit and a measurement of capital employed, and different accounting methodologies or manipulation can occur, so therefore we may not be able to compare readily. So that's the end of this question. Like I say, these are not actual answers. I would make them into proper sentences. These are the sorts of things I would expect to be included. I encourage the use of headings. It really does make a difference. Like I said earlier, if you need to come back and finish off later, it helps the marker see your thought process and understand where you are. It also helps that discipline of sticking to the point and making sure you're only answering what's being asked and not going off on a tangent. Thanks for listening. Now on to this question, Ike Co. I'm going to go through the requirements. We've got to first use simultaneous equations to calculate the optimal production mix for July as represented by point B and the resulting contribution. So 2 things we need to do there. That's 8 marks. And then for 3 marks, if the availability of direct material L in July increases by 10%, explain the impact that will have on optimal production level for both products. And then briefly explain the meaning of shadow price and which one of the 2 direct materials is likely to have no shadow price based on the production plan for August. Previous question was asking about July, so make sure we're looking at the right part. That's 2 marks. Based on the optimal production mix in August, estimate the shadow price of direct material M for 4 marks. and assume the shadow price of direct material M is 120 per litre, and a new supplier is offering to supply an additional 5% this price of 245. Should we accept the offer price and justify the advice? And that's 3 marks. Okay, part A1, we need to find the optimal production mix for July. So once again, pause the video, read through this, and then I'll scroll down so you can unpause and read the second bit. Okay, so we need to use simultaneous equations for the optimal mix, which is based on this point B, which is where these two lines cross, and a straight line on a graph at the point of intersection, the point they cross, the value of y for each of these two lines must be the same, as is the value of x for each of them must also be the same. So what we need to do is create an equation for one line, another equation for the other one, and then because we know the values of y and the values of x in both of those equations are the same, i.e. value of y1 is the same as y2 and the value of x1 is the same as value of x2, at this point then we should be able to solve for the unknowns, and that's how the simultaneous equation process works. So let's start with this bottom line. We can see this is for direct material M. When making a food container, the cost of M is $4 and it costs 80 a litre. So the amount used is 0.5 litres. And then for the water bottle, it's exactly the same because it's 4 used for production and it costs 80, so also uses that for water. And just as a reminder of the units, the x-axis shows us the food, so that's on the x-axis, and the y-axis shows us the water bottles. Now the third thing we need to do is find out how much of M is available. And it doesn't tell us that, so we've got to work it out from the information we have. Make sure you don't use this figure. Remember, that's for August, that's for the next part of the question. We've just got the information in the top here. So how do we go about finding out about how much there is? We can use the line where it crosses one of the axes, and we're going to use it where it crosses here at 2,500. So at this point here where my cursor is, we're not making any units of X, i.e. the food, but we're making 2,000 units of the water container. If we're making 2,500 units and each unit uses 0.05, we multiply those together. That will give us our maximum, because remember the line is a constraint. That's the most we've got. We can't make any more, and that's because M, or material M, limits us. So now we've got the 3 elements we need in order to create the equation of this line. So every time we make an X, we use 0.05. Every time we use a Y, we use a 0.05. And it has to be less than or equal to our maximum, which is 125 litres. So that is the equation of this line. The feasible region is anything that's below or on that line, hence the less than or equal to. And then we have to do the same for our second line, which is machine hours. And so far I've just copied and pasted above because I'm just going to repurpose everything. So for food, for machine, it costs $20 and there's 20 per machine hour. So this time this becomes 20 over 20. I know I don't need to write it out. And instead of litres, we've got hours. For water, it uses 15 at a cost of 20, so that's 0.75. And the maximum this time, so when X is 0, we've got 3,000 machine hours, and Y uses 0.75, so therefore our maximum available is 225 hours. And then I'm going to write this out again, so for every X we use 1, for every Y we use 0.75, and that has to be less than or equal to 2250. And so this equation, X plus 0.75Y is less than or equal to 2250, is this straight line here. And as I said before, at the point B where they cross, this value of X and this value of X are the same, and this value of Y and this value of Y are the same. When we come to solve them, we can drop the less than sign because we solve on the line, which is where equals is at play rather than the less than sign. There are 2 main ways of solving simultaneous equations. One is you adjust one of them, so you've got the same number of x's, or you've got the same number of y's, and then you subtract one from the other to leave a single term, solve for that, and then plug it back in. The other is to rearrange one, so you get something like x equals, and then you substitute that into the first one, and then solve it that way. So I'm going to rearrange 2 so I can end up with x equals. So I've rearranged 2, I'm going to substitute that into 1. You don't have to write this out. I'm doing this more for an element of tuition. So now I rewrite 1 out, but everywhere there's an x, I use the bit that I've got here. So I've got 0.05 times 2250 minus 0.75y. That's that first term, plus 0.05y equals 125. Next I multiply out the brackets. So I end up with 112.5 minus 0.0375y. Don't miss the sign and don't accidentally lose the y. 2 common mistakes. Plus the 0.05y equals 125. Now I'm going to do 2 stages. I'm going to bring the 112.5 to the other side, and I'm going to do this sum here. So 0.0125y equals 12.5. So y equals 12.5 over 0.0125. So y equals 1000. And now we need to substitute this into one of these to find x. I'm going to substitute into 2. So I'm going to rewrite this, and everywhere there's a y, I'm going to replace it with 1000. Okay, so did the sum here to get 750, brought it to the other side, so x is 1500. So at point B, the value of x is 1500, i.e. 1500 units of the food container, and y is 1000, that's 1000 units of the water bottle. That's the optimum production. We're asked to, this is 8 marks, calculate the optimum production. So the optimum production is 1000 units of y and 1500 units of x. Highlight that for the examiner. And now we need the resulting contribution. So food we are going to make, that was the value of x, so that's 1500 units. And water bottles we're going to make 1000. We sell the food containers for 58 and the water for 42. Material L, we use 1250. I'm going to use minus 1250 there and minus 5 there. For material M, that costs 4 and also 4. Machine, that's costing 20 and that's costing 15. Fixed overheads we don't include because that's what the contribution goes to. So the contribution is the sum of just those 4. So then the total contribution equals contribution per unit multiplied by the number of units. And so then the overall contribution is adding those 2 together. Okay, so that's 8 marks. Quite a few stages there, but I think it's doable within the time as long as you're comfortable with the rearranging and the substitution of simultaneous equations. A2, if the availability of direct material L increases by 10%, what impact will it have on optimum production level for both products? Well, direct material L is represented by this line. So if the availability increased, this line would move upwards and outwards in this direction. So from where it is, upwards and outwards. Because the optimum point is this side of it, i.e. below and to the left, moving that will have no impact on production level because we already have a surplus of material L based on the optimum production. Now this is tricky because for 3 marks, if we say no impact, we're probably only going to get 1 of them. So we need to think, how do we hunt for 3 marks? And that's one of the challenges. When we have a question like this, the simple answer is it will have no effect. It's just not going to get us 3 marks. What do 3 marks look like in my mind for this? So I think the first mark is no effect. I think if we say it will have no effect, that may get a mark. I think there's probably a generous allocation here. But then we need to say why. And the reason is because it's not a binding constraint. What does that mean? Which means additional 10% will not be of benefit. So I've definitely got 1 mark there. I may have got the second mark. It's a bit hard to know. Definitely haven't got 3 marks. So what could we do to get a third mark or another mark definitely? Well, I would probably talk about the graph, because what I'm doing is then showing the examiner I understand the graph and I can explain it. So then I would say, looking at the graph, line L would move up and to the right if an additional 10% was available, no impact on optimum point B. So I feel I've definitely got 2 marks. There may be the third mark there, but I want to be sure. If I've got time, I want to see if I can get as many marks as I can. So I would probably say the only way to increase production levels is to increase availability of binding constraints, which in this case is material M and machine hours. So now it feels like I've probably got the full 3 marks. And what I said in that last bit is if we increased machine hours, that's this line, that would move up and to the right, and so the point B would start to slide this way. And if we increased direct materials M, then this line would move up and to the right, and so point B would slide up here, increasing production. Okay, unusual again to have a question where we're given the narrative answer in the spreadsheet. But don't fall into the trap of just saying no effect or no effect because it's not a binding constraint. Use the mark allocation to drive the amount of content that you give. Really important for these narrative questions. So again, we've got a use of the spreadsheet for a narrative answer. Briefly explain the meaning of shadow price, in which one of the 2 direct materials is likely to have no shadow price based on production plan for August. So the shadow price is the additional contribution which would be earned if 1 more unit of a scarce resource was available. It's a definition that might be worth learning. And so which of the 2 materials, this is for the second mark, is likely to have no shadow price? So either L or M. Well, it tells us that supply of material M is in shortage. So therefore, material L is likely to have no shadow price as it is M that is in short supply. B2, based on the optimum production mix in August, estimate the shadow price of direct material M. So we need to take the optimum production here, which is 900 units and 2,100 units. Actually, a bit of a giveaway. Part B pretty much gives you the answer, so B2 to the second part of B1. So the optimum is to produce 900 units of food, which is on the X, plus 2,100 of Y. Now you can just do a straightforward calculation, but for reasons that hopefully will become clear, I'm going to put it in a little table. So we've got 900 of X, 2,100 of Y. And the contribution we worked out before, so it's 2150 and 18. I don't like numbers suddenly appearing in a spreadsheet. I think it's a risk because if you've made a mistake, the examiner will not know where it's come from. So I would put a little note from previous spreadsheet workings. At least then it's clear where it's come from. So the total contribution equals that times that times that, and then that one plus that one is the total contribution. Okay, so what happens if we have 1 more litre of M, which is, remember in our shadow price definition, additional contribution if we could get 1 more unit, and the units are measured in litres. So we now need to get our simultaneous equations from the previous spreadsheet, which is a little bit of a pain because we have to go back and forth, but I did manage to copy and paste them. So this is our simultaneous equations that we worked out before, and we know we can reuse them because the linear programming model applies in August. So the linear programming model gives us our simultaneous equations, but our availability is different. So you can see for material M, instead of 125, in August we have 150, and for machine we have 2475. If we were to do like we did before, substitute in or rearrange these and solve the simultaneous equations, we'd end up with the optimum production plan, but we've been given that, so we don't want to repeat something we've been given. What we do need to do is say, well, if we have 1 more litre of M, then this stops being 150 and becomes 151, and then we go through the solution. So I rearranged 2 just like I did before, then I put 2 and 2, 1. So I substituted that in, expanded the brackets, did some rearranging, ended up with y equals 27.25 over 0.0125, so y equals 2,180. So therefore x equals, and I'm going to just go straight ahead and do it here, so it's 2475 minus 0.75 times that value of y is 840. So what that means is instead of the optimum production plan of 900 and 2,100, if we have an extra litre of M. This is our new optimum production plan. And now you'll see why I did this. So I'm going to copy and paste this table I did above. Contribution stays the same, but instead of those figures, I'm just going to bring the figures that I've just calculated. And you see I've got a new contribution. So the shadow price is the maximum we'd be willing to pay. So it's the new contribution. We subtract the earlier contribution. The shadow price we would be willing to pay for 1 litre is $150. And remember, that's $150 over and above the 80 we're already paying. We'd be happy to pay up to 230 in total. That's a tough number of steps needed for 4 marks. And then B3, assume the shadow price is this, and new suppliers offering to supply an additional 5% at this price. Should they accept the offer? Well, let's do a little side calculation. Shadow is 120, per unit is 80 from the table here. Total max is those together, 200. And they're offering at 245, so the answer is no. So I've got a mark for showing the calculation I'd have thought. So I need to try and get 2 in my explanation. The reason is the maximum they would be willing to pay is the shadow price, which is assumed 120, that's what they told us, plus the per litre price of 80. And what's the implication? As 245 is the offer, the overall contribution would be lower if they accept it. I'm going to take my no out of there, therefore they should reject. Or we could be a bit smarter, or they should negotiate a price less than $200. Okay, so that's the end of this section C question. This 4 marks here definitely required quite a lot of work and heavy lifting to get those 4 marks. Hopefully, if you were getting stuck, you'd have been able to get those 2 marks. And part 3 didn't require us to answer part 2, so you could have done part 3, and then maybe if you had some spare time, try a couple of steps at part 2 and maybe picked up a couple of the marks. Thanks for listening.